Right. Welcome, everyone. This is the first podcast of Identity Human. So, I spent a long time thinking about starting a podcast and actually being told to start a podcast. And the one blocker has been not knowing what it's going to be called, who's going to be aimed at. And then, you just wait for things to happen. Sometimes you just have to wait. And I saw the good old Alex Hermosi saying you don't need to niche in something to talk about it. Obviously people want to listen to you talking and they're interested in what you're going to say, and that kind of answers my questions because I'm interested in a lot, and I'm interested in people and how things work, and I like to talk about a lot of things. Where we could have done a gas podcast where it's just about gaming and everything within gaming, talking about addiction, psychology, mental health, all the things within gaming. But I just thought that, I've also got the leadership business and there's things I want to talk about in there. So I figured, let's go with Identity Human because I think that encapsulates a lot of what we're passionate about, the reason people follow on this, and I think it can be interesting in a lot of different ways, and I can be me authentically, and I think that's what's important. So today we'll just do a tester podcast, and it's going to be around breath. I'm going to quickly go through some old notes, and we'll see how this lands, so we can follow the process. And yeah, we'll go from there. So we want to eventually lead to guests. We've done a whole lot of brainstorming on podcasts. We want to get to a minimum of 26 episodes, get a budget to be able to fly people in. Like, that's the big vision, that's the dream. And yeah, we'll see how we go. So breath test, right? So first of all, if you listen to this, hold your right hand on your chest, and your right hand on chest. And then I didn't say what to do with left hand. Breathe for 3 seconds. Okay, that doesn't really work. Forget I said that. We'll hopefully edit that out. Doesn't matter. Nose breathing. Right. Why should we nose breathe? Right. So first of all, to sleep better. That if we look at gas and what we're trying to achieve there, and it's just going from sleep niching, because I think that there's a whole thing to be said about how important sleep is. The problem is we don't really understand it because it doesn't have a direct effect, and we think it's so many other things, but it comes down to sleep. So my first note that I've got here is nose breathing, and it helps us sleep better. If you have a dry mouth when you're waking up, that means you're not sleeping well because you're breathing through your mouth and not your nose. So we need to work on our nose breathing. And the way that I've done that in the past, and remember, these views are my own, not medical advice, is sticking some tape over your mouth. And you can start that off by doing it for just 10 minutes a day. You can start by doing an hour before bed, and then you can start to see how you do it overnight. When I first started, I'd wake up at like 2 o'clock in the morning feeling really well refreshed, but also sometimes slightly panicky. And then you just take it off and you go back to sleep. So you can start to train it in, get used to just breathing through your nose and out your mouth. And I think there's even techniques where you can do right nostril, left nostril breathing. We'll get into that as we go. The mouth has zero functions for breath. I remember when I was doing the research, it's quite fascinating because it's quite true. And I actually even saw the other day that there's 3 different airways that you can breathe through your nose. You can, and yeah, the person that was showing actually had one of those ear cleaners, like swabs, up their nose, and then they showed it at different angles and they gave a good graphic for it. And that was quite interesting to see. But the human nose has 30 functions. So the mouth has 0 functions for breath. The human nose has 30 functions. Some of them as examples are activating a diaphragm and better oxygen uptake and delivery. So, I don't want to list all 30 functions here, but that's quite interesting. When it comes down to breath work, why is nose over mouth more important? And I think there's obviously key to say this is in low functioning, low breath rate activities, not when you're trying to run around and sprint, because it's really hard. I've tried to do it when going for a jog or a run, and yes, you can do it, and it takes a bit of training. But I think on the whole, you can get more oxygen in through your mouth. So maybe it does have a function, and you actually need to suck in as much air as possible. Or is it because I'm not trained in my nose breathing? Who knows? So mouth breathing, interesting here, is a fight or flight activator. So it does have a use. Even though it said it doesn't, it does have a use. Now that's interesting. Actually, if you think about like when you're trying to get things going, if you like pre-rugby game and the breath, you have to like, you see when people hyperventilate, they have to breathe through a brown paper bag, etc., etc. I think there's a lot that goes in there. Poor breathing if you hold your breath and feeling short of breath, and you feel the need to take a long breath, running out of breath, there's lots of lots of short breaths. Okay, so that was an example. What I wrote here is poor breathing is if you hold your breath and you feel short of breath, or you feel the need to take a long breath, or running out of breath. There's lots of short. It's like if you feel yourself having to consciously take in an extra breath because you're not getting in, that's a sign of poor breathing. Short, shallow breaths. And this is a note here. This is interesting. I said short, shallow breaths have an impact on mental health. Now, yeah, I'm interested in that. I wonder how it all links and how we can get to the explaining of it. Perhaps I get into that as we go. Now, I tried to do a graph on nose versus mouth, and I wrote, what does mouth do? Mouth actually does activate fight or flight, and it's sympathetic activity, where as opposed to parasympathetic, maybe. I don't know. We'll get to the word later. Luckily, this is a test podcast. Everyone has to start somewhere. So more for the nose stuff, so that you can recap, is it's more relaxed, better oxygen uptake and delivery, activates the diaphragm, releases nitric oxide, is a vasodilator, which basically means it widens your blood cells, which means that you're getting more oxygen into your blood and means you're getting a better oxygen circulation around your body. Interestingly here, it supports correct formation of teeth and mouth. So think about how important that is for kids, and especially as they're young and as you grow. If you can watch someone that actually focuses on breathing or breath work, see how they transform people's face shapes just by focusing on how they breathe. So the bigger jawline starts to form, the better jaw formation comes through nose breathing. And I've followed a lot of people that do those kinds of what's the word I'm looking for, like professions, and they show the case studies of people's jawlines being more formed, and all they focused on was diaphragm and nose breathing, which is quite interesting. I wrote a note, and I'm not sure the context on it, but nitric oxide. And I imagine that's a lack of or an overdose of, which you don't get when you breathe through your nose. Some of the side effects here, and hopefully no one suffers from these, is I can't really say, actually. I'm not really sure on the age group of this podcast at the moment. Nitric, I think nose breathing helps activate nitric oxide, which may decrease muscle soreness, lower your blood pressure. Blood pressure, if anyone's suffering from that, just focus on nose breathing. Boost exercise performance, and then may help manage type 2 diabetes. That's interesting. Now, how on earth does it manage type 2 diabetes? I'd love to get a bit more into that. I'd actually love to have someone on the podcast that knows all this stuff so that we can bring up these highlights and then they can give us a bit of information. So positives of nose breathing: become healthier and stronger, more endorphins released, and improves feeling of natural well-being. Your muscles relax, your heart rate and blood pressure decrease. It'd be interesting to do some tests on that. And you can help control your emotions and fears. Yeah, I mean, the best way to see how this works is stick yourself in an ice bath or stick someone else in and watch how they go from shock to calm just by focusing on their breathing. Currently, my kids are doing the 20-day in the ice bath challenge, and my daughter's a very good example. On 3 seconds, she dunks her head under, comes out, and then panic breathes. And then I just say to her, calm, breathe, calm. And she calms right down. And within 2 seconds, she's back to normal. And and maybe I'll cover it just now. So more endorphins released improves feeling of natural well-being, which we said. You can help control your emotions and fears. You can reduce feelings of stress, anxiety, and depression, clear a sharper mind. So I think the issue that comes with breathing is it's hard to just sit there and realize how big an effect it has, because you can sit down and you do your breath work for 15 minutes and you get up and you go, yeah, okay, maybe I feel slightly better. But it's not like when you go for a run and you come back and you're like, wow, that's a big change. Like, I feel so much better. I think it's just that, like, realizing how those things stack up and how you can create the discipline and consistency around doing all of these. Now, I moved on to some deep breathing. So diaphragmatic, abdominal, or belly, or paced breathing. So it's like when you're actually focusing on where the breath is coming from and how you're getting in and out of it. The taboo of a flat stomach, I said just. So therefore, we limit to shallow breathing because we want to make sure our belly doesn't protrude when we're breathing. But actually, that's a healthier way to breathe, is breathing through the belly. And I suppose I mean, the example that comes to mind is the strongman competitions. You see how big their bellies are. It's because they've got really good core strength. They've got their good, like their breath work is, they've got to be focused. Obviously, they've got to get explosive power and sustained power and all that. And it all comes to their bellies. So they've got really strong core. Whereas these days we want to make sure that people think we're fit and healthy, and so we suck it in through the tummy and then breathe through the chest, which actually is probably was actually the incorrect way of doing it. So deep breathing breaks a cycle of gasping breaths and airway constriction. So like asthma, COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. I mean, I've never experienced that. I just wrote that down. But I suppose if we focus on deep breathing, it breaks the cycle of gasping breaths, which is an interesting way of like training yourself through your asthma and helping you make sure that you are managing your asthma in the best way as possible, rather than just using the inhaler. It helps trigger the relaxation response, which helps with sleep. So therefore, if you do a bit of breath work before you go to sleep, I'm convincing myself to start doing some breath work again. Yeah, improved oxygen in the blood which enhances your metabolism, boosting your energy. That's important, isn't it? Like we want to boost that metabolism to get things flowing and just a little bit better. National Sleep Foundation recommends breathwork for sleep. Interesting. I've just put a side note there on like manage your expectations and manage your time. Imagine if you're struggling to sleep or you're struggling with insomnia and you try the breath work and it doesn't help, you think, oh, that doesn't really work. But if you actually just keep going, then it starts to take an effect. So you've got to have a little bit of faith. Deep breathing naturally aids posture. Interesting. Because I think we all suffer from a bit of posture problems, especially if you're sitting at a desk all day. Helps with balance because it connects that body. It has that body connection. Interesting. Hair growth. Oxygen for well. Any of you balding, losing hair, thinning hair? Maybe it's just in the breathing. I'm going to try this out. I'm going to do some breath work and see if it does help. It helps prevent injuries because it reduces the strain. Because oxygen increase makes you more efficient. Interesting. So no, I need to stay on track here. So breath work can help with your hair growth. I imagine it would be like 5 years of breath work will help everything go back up. So let's start to take it seriously because it has so many different aspects that it helps with. So now we are going into something a bit deeper. So like autonomous nervous system. So no thought required. Sympathetic nervous system is go stress, like gets processes going, fight or flight. Your parasympathetic, which stops processes. So every day, this is stop, relax. So mouth breathing, like I said earlier, activates your sympathetic nervous system. So that's your fight or flight. Let's go. Like if someone is coming in through the door, you needed to get going quickly, mouth breathe like, let's go. And you'll start to see that like you start to feel all excited. But we want to slow that down. Sometimes the parasympathetic nervous system. Deep breathing can aid in parasympathetic nervous system. And I said ANS, so autonomous nervous system, so no thought required. Deep breathing can aid in your ANS, which is lower your heart rate, your blood pressure. It can get you more relaxed. It reduces your cortisol, which is your stress hormone. So all of the things that we're trying to search answers for, sometimes they come into something as simple as breath work. But we just don't see the immediate results. So deep breathing plus CBT or hypnotherapy, so cognitive behavioral therapy, helps with IBS. I mean, that was a study that I found, and I thought that was quite weird, but it kind of makes sense. And they say cognitive behavioral therapy will still be the best overall for things. So cognitive behavioral therapy goes into the mind, doesn't it? It just goes into let's build the habits, make sure we understand things, and keep rewiring our brains to make sure that we're going in the right direction. So some breath exercises that we can do: square breathing, so 4 sets each, 4 seconds each way. Sorry, so in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. That one is called box breathing, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Do that for 5 to 20 minutes. That will help with your anxiety, stress, sleep disorders, and it's easy to remember. Then you can do 4-7-8 breathing, and I imagine I can't remember exactly what it is. I wrote this a long time ago, but hold for 4, out for 7, in for 8. I'm gonna actually retouch on that because I don't remember what that is. don't listen to me on that bit. Paradoxical breathing is for chronic stress, fight or flight overload, acute trauma, prolonged sitting. So like paradoxical breathing, I need to actually learn what that is because I just wrote it down and didn't say tripod position, pursed lips. Okay, learn how to breathe again. So if you are struggling from chronic stress, flight or flight overload, that's if you're in it all the time. I think no matter what you do, any breath work can be good, and it can help. Mindful breathing, just focus on your breath. So I like mindful breathing. That's what I do in the ice bath. You just gotta learn. So like it's basically just sitting there and going, just be aware of your breath. So your chest, your tummy, whatever it is, just be aware of it. Now, neuroplasticity within the lungs, which is what I've written here towards asthma. So practice belly breathing if you have asthma with pursed lips, because that'll restrict the amount of air, make it harder. So therefore your lungs have to work a little bit harder. The less elastic lungs with asthma, therefore use your neck, your back, your chest to help you breathe because you have less oxygen. Interesting. Therefore, use your neck, your back, and your chest to help breathe. Therefore, less oxygen. Oh, okay. So I think what I was saying is when you have asthma, you have less elastic lungs. And because you have less elastic lungs, you use your neck, your back, and your chest to help you breathe. And in doing so, you get less oxygen into your lungs because your lungs aren't the thing doing the work. It's your whole body trying to compensate. So just to touch on the paradoxical breathing, it's breathe in for 4, hold for 7, and breathe out for 8. And that can get quite challenging, but I quite enjoy the sound. So that's 4, 7, 8 breathing, not paradoxical breathing. Now, rib stretch breathing, which I've also written here, is arms crossed, and then hold for 5 to 10 seconds your breath, and see how that works, and then push it out. And I suppose it's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? Rib stretch breathing. I'm not going to get into that. We are just reading through some old notes. So COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which this is not something that I want you to be coming here for advice for. Definitely not. This is just my opinions and a little bit of brief knowledge digging. But here's a bit about. Oh, hold on. So certain things. So bad breathing is linked with COPD, so chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and anxiety and depression, right? Which causes which through. So I think there's a link with COPD and anxiety and depression, but it all comes down to breathing because I think that study was trying to say that those that have COPD end up having anxiety and depression because it's a bad breath mechanism. And I think why that was important to say here is it's not because we have COPD, but it is a good example of what happens when your breath is restricted to your mental health. And so why is breathing important if you're struggling with mental health? Is because the opposite effect, if you're not breathing well, can worsen it. So therefore, if you're focusing on your breathing well, it can make it better, if that makes sense, or can help improve it. So now it's on the more you know type of information here. So your vagus nerve, which is part of your parasympathetic nervous system. Now remember, that's your slow it down nervous system. Controls and measures activity of many internal organs. This is your vagus nerve. When stimulated, calmness pervades. Your heart rate slows down, your blood pressure slows down, your muscles relax. So your vagus nerve signals the brain to relax and be peaceful. And now why we're pointing that out is it's neurobiological. We want to understand our biological drivers. And that's the brain. Train your brain, and this is a why tool, not just a how tool. So train your brain to understand why your vagus nerve is connected to all of these things and why breathing is important. And you breathe by having the intent behind your breath work and actually going, I am actively going to try and do my breath work here. So one of my helpful community has told me about what paradoxical breathing is. And it's when the chest expands during inhalation and the abdomen is drawn inwards. And then during exhalation, the abdomen is pushed outwards. Okay. So you can see that I suppose the intent behind that is to strengthen those lungs within deep belly breathing to help. And that, if I'm going to refresh our memories, helps with chronic stress, flight or flight overload, acute trauma, prolonged sitting. It's because there's a real big focus on deep breathing. Now, side note back onto the brain is when focusing on breath, what are you doing? You've got to be present, which is a structure, and it's not relying on emotion. So we're all about structures on here, high performance triangle, which we'll explain in another podcast. But it just means that when you're doing your breath work, which is the intention to help with all these other things, what you're essentially doing is bringing yourself to the now. And it's getting rid of everything else that's going on and allowing your brain to just think. So now I did write a little bit about insomnia here. So 20 minutes slow breath exercise, which is 6 cycles per minute. So that's 20 minutes slow breath exercise, 6 cycles per minute. It helps you get to sleep faster, less frequent wake ups. So, I mean, why? It's because you're constantly calming that parasympathetic nervous system. So 20 minutes slow breath exercise, which is 5 minutes, 5 times 5 minutes, 6 cycles per minute. So you want to try and breathe through 6 cycles every minute. Try and get yourself a stopwatch or an app that'll help that. This also helps with anxiety and depressive disorders. So like moving on to the last bit here, which is the 3-6-5 method. Now, the 3-6-5 method is 3 times a day, 6 cycles per minute rhythm. So 5 times 5, inhale, exhale. So inhale for 5 seconds, exhale for 5 seconds for 5 minutes. So you want to do 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, times 6 for 5 minutes, 3 times a day. That's called the 3-6-5 method. This modifies brain circuits, makes you less vulnerable to stress and anxiety. And then I've put here as the last note, like inhale for panic. So inhale for panic. So just to give you an understanding of what that 3-6-5 method is, you do this 3 times a day. It's 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. I'm going to try through my nose. 5 seconds in. And you see it's just intentional on all of these things. I think the intent is what's important. So that brings us to the end of our first podcast. And just reading those couple of notes, it takes us 22 minutes in, which is quite impressive. And I quite enjoyed that. It takes me back to when we first started these things. So hope you enjoyed this first all over the place podcast, the first time we've done it. And we'll see how we can build from here. But like I said, if you were joining the journey now, you would be I think it's going to get more and more rewarding to see how this builds out. Right now, we're doing it on stream, following a Spotify podcast type creation, and we're just literally following the process as it goes. Come back in 3 months' time. Let's see where we are and how this develops. But this is the start point. This is how it's going to be. And we're going to stop recording.